All of 5 on Community Radio. You're brought to you by Lawless Hotel Dungarvan. I'm Justin Marr here with you till 6:30 this evening. Now, just after Christmas, the President signed into law the Assisted Decision-Making Bill, which repealed the Lunacy Act of 1871 and gave every citizen the right to a say in how they're cared for. Inclusion Ireland, the national rights-based advocacy organisation committed to the promotion of the rights of people with an intellectual disability, welcomed the bill's enactment, saying it will result in significant improvements in the lives of persons with intellectual disabilities as their ability to make decisions for themselves will be enshrined into law. Earlier today, I spoke to Inclusion Ireland's Training and Development Officer, Sarah Lennon. Sarah had been working on the legislation for the last 10 years, and she told me about the importance of introducing the new act.
What we're looking at really is the replacement of a piece of legislation that's almost 150 years old. It's from 1871, so we're talking about Victorian Ireland, and with it we have a system in Ireland called the Ward of Court system. And essentially what the Ward of Court system does is where a person needs decisions made on their behalf, or in some way needs to have support making their own decisions, the only system we have in Ireland is called Ward of Court. Typically that happens when somebody comes into money, so maybe they inherit a property or they receive damages after an accident, and somebody else is concerned about whether they can manage that money or not. The only difficulty with Ward of Court is it was designed 150 years ago, and it's simply not fit for purpose in a modern Ireland. It's very restrictive. The person loses a lot of their own rights to make decisions, not just about their money, but also about things like medical care, travelling, also things like marrying, voting, having relationships. So it's a really, really restrictive system. And I suppose organisations like Inclusion Ireland have been campaigning for a change in the law for a long time, and we finally have arrived at a point where we now have an assisted decision-making legislation, which is far more fit for a purpose in a modern Ireland.
It's kind of frightening when you mention the Victorian era, when you look at the attitudes, particularly, say, you're almost going back before around the time of Freud even. This is quite a long time ago. Why has it taken so long to adjust our attitude in this area?
It's very difficult to say why it's taken that long. I mean, you could speculate and say that maybe its importance was misunderstood, that maybe it's not a particularly vote-getting piece of legislation. It's also quite complex in terms of what it's trying to undo and put in place. But I think that in fairness to the current government, and it's not often people say things like that, but in fairness to the current government, they've been very engaged on this piece of legislation. There's been almost 1,000 amendments put through on it since it started in 2013 to its enactment at the end of the year. So it's something that they've really engaged with organisations like Inclusion Ireland, people with disabilities themselves, to try and get something that would be really useful for them. But it's not something that just this government has dragged its heels on. Successive governments have promised that the bill will be introduced by the end of the year and yet just failed to deliver on it. It's not something that will cost a lot of money. Most of it is procedural. Most of it is just about putting legal rights in place. But it's maybe something that wasn't particularly high on the political priority list.
Do you feel now the legislation that has been signed by the President, does that now give an accurate reflection of how our attitude should be today?
It's pretty good. It's certainly better than the 2008 bill, which the previous government introduced. So although it's, obviously the best part of a decade since then, and it's taken us a while to get here, it's certainly a lot better than that and a lot better than what we had. Whether or not it would comply with the likes of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, it probably doesn't. So it's still not perfect. But what we have is built into it a review mechanism within 5 years. And so part of the work really for organisations like Inclusion and other organisations is to get the legislation up, running and being used, but also with one eye on reviewing it again in 5 years' time. It's really important that we review this type of legislation constantly as opinions change, as people become more visible and active in their communities. And, also we can never get to a situation where it's 145 years between reviewing legislation again anyway. So the fact that review is built into the legislation is really, really important. And almost we begin, analysing and looking at law reform from the minute it starts. But we do need to make sure that people know about this legislation, what it can mean for them, and actually get it used, because it's going to be very, very beneficial for a lot of people.
Because certainly, and we're talking about, over the last few decades, we've seen an enormous growth in discovery about mental health. We've seen, obviously, life expectancies are getting longer and issues such as Alzheimer's are becoming more prevalent. You're looking for something with this 5-year mechanism in place that can address these issues as they evolve.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, what we need to do, and what will be a new service and a new office set up under this legislation. It needs to engage from the word go with self-advocates, with national organisations that aren't, with non-government organisations, with service users, with people on the ground, and perform, focus groups and hear opinions all the time. And we've no reason to expect that won't happen, but we'll certainly be clamouring for that, and that there's engagement all the time about, as you say, new developments, new opinions, and that they have their ear to the ground. And we'll certainly be keeping the pressure on them to engage with us.
How important do you see this act as being in the future? I mean, because of these changes, because of the developments, as we discover more and we learn more, will this act become even more important as time progresses?
It will do, and it's very important, I suppose. We have a tendency to think about who it will affect today, and the categories of people that it can affect today are people with intellectual disability, mental illness, older people, people with Alzheimer's, people with dementia, people with brain injury, people with stroke. But the fact of the matter is, as you say, as we get older, as we live longer, our ability to make our own decisions can be questioned. Our ability to make some decisions but not others can be in doubt. And what this legislation allows us to do for the first time in Ireland is to say, I need support making this decision. It could be financial, medical, it could be any other type of decision. I need support making that decision, and now I can legally get it. Up until now, no one could support you to make a decision or make a decision on your behalf when you're an adult unless you're made a ward of court. So it was an all or nothing. And what we have now is a far more tailored, individualised, appropriate to the person's needs approach. It really is, it's a night and day. We won't stand still and say that we're happy with this situation forever, but it really is a night and day situation from where we've come to where we are. It has taken 145 years to get here, but nonetheless, it's a very positive development, and one that we'd be very keen for people to learn more about, understand how they can use it themselves in their own lives, or how their family members might need to use it as well.
And will you be providing that information on your website? Will Inclusion Ireland play a role in that, making people more aware of it?
Absolutely. We have a dedicated section on our website. It's called our capacity section on inclusionireland.ie. We also have a fact sheet on it, which is free of charge, so anyone can get that from our office. And we'll hopefully be doing some. We do a lot of talks on this throughout the year around the country. So if people keep an eye on our website, they'll see where there's an information talk happening as well. We'll also be calling on the government and the Department of Justice to put in place some funding for not necessarily us, but for somebody to go out and do public information sessions on this, because it's that important. But we'll certainly be doing our own work, and anyone who wants to contact us to discuss it further is more than welcome to do so.
Sarah Lennon from Inclusion Ireland talking about the Assisted Decision Making Act, which was signed into law just after Christmas. As Sarah mentioned, you can find out more, or you can get a copy of the fact sheet at Inclusion Ireland's website, inclusionireland.ie, or you can call Inclusion Ireland on 01 855 9891. That's 01 855 9891. And as always, if you ever need that contact information, you can contact us here at the station.